HWA Church of God presentation. In August 1914, Europe erupted in war. For 4 terrible years, the great powers battled each other until they reached a standstill in the fields of France and Belgium. When the conflict was over and the armistice signed, a generation of young men had been slaughtered. The world was sobered. Weapons had become so powerful, the destruction so complete. Surely civilization could not survive another war like this. This had to be the war to end all wars. Following the armistice, King Albert I of Belgium visited a battlefield in his shattered kingdom. Appalled by the scenes of ruin and slaughter, the king ordered an iron shell casing found on the battlefield to be cast into 4 watch cases. He intended to present the watches to the 4 individuals who he felt had made the most significant contribution to peace. One watch went to Field Marshal Ferdinand Foch, head of the Allied Supreme Command. Another was given to General John J. Pershing, Commander-in-Chief of the American Expeditionary Force. The 3rd watch was presented to France's Premier, Georges Clemenceau, for his inspiring leadership in the dark days of war. But King Albert did not find anyone qualified to receive the 4th watch. When King Albert died, it was passed on to his son, King Leopold III. In 1970, half a century after the end of World War I, King Leopold presented this 4th watch to Herbert W. Armstrong. In accepting it, Mr. Armstrong said, "I feel it was the highest honor the king could have paid anyone. Whatever contribution to world peace I may be making is not through war, but through education, teaching millions worldwide the way to peace." The 20th century has been a time of paradox, the most progressive and yet the most destructive decades in all history. Great advances have been made in science, engineering, architecture, medicine. Knowledge has exploded in nearly every field of human endeavor. And yet mankind is still losing the battle against the age-old curses of poverty, ignorance, superstition, and war. A few men have cavorted in triumph in the dust of the moon, but millions still languish in despair in the dust of the earth. Even as we forge ahead with brilliant progress and incredible inventions, we edge ever closer to a disaster which would make the earth once more without form and void. Is this how it will end, this century of great advancement?
And now the weapons exist for the first time in all history when they can snuff out every life of every man, woman, and child on this earth. They can just blast all humanity off the earth until not one of us would be left alive. If some idiot, and he would be an idiot, sets off the nuclear explosion, and today You know that several nations, several smaller nations, have nuclear weapons. And they could start it, and it would go to Russia and the United States and the big nations, and finally there wouldn't be any humanity left. Most of us are asleep, and we don't realize what's going on all over the world. I am a voice crying out in the wilderness, the Babylon of religious confusion, of educational chaos and materialism, of political confusion and trouble in the governments of the world, all arming to have war and more war, in a society that is bankrupt, in an economic system that is bankrupt, in that kind of a system. And I'm here to bring you the truth. So I ask you to open your ears and to listen, because you don't hear this from any other voice. Why do we have these...
Herbert Armstrong has been a voice of sanity in these decades of confusion.
World leaders have said...
He has traveled the world, meeting heads of state of many nations. He has met the only two ruling emperors since the end of World War I, Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia and Emperor Hirohito of Japan. He has also met with presidents and prime ministers of many nations: the United Kingdom, Kenya, India, Israel, the Philippines, and Indonesia. He has also met all 7 prime ministers of Japan since 1970. Mr. Armstrong explains the true cause of mankind's troubles. Why, in spite of the great progress in physical knowledge, the nations of the world cannot find the way to lasting peace.
I've been coming to Japan now for many years. I'm a little hoarse tonight. You'll have to excuse me. I was speaking quite a while last night to many readers of our magazine, The Plain Truth, and I find that I'm a little hoarse. But as I was telling them last night, I have seen so many things happen in this world in the almost 90 years that I have lived. I have seen miraculous things happen. I have seen awesome progress. But also I have seen appalling troubles and evils happening in the world, and it is becoming worse all the time. I have to ask why. Why the paradox of awesome progress and awesome accomplishments, sending men to the moon and back, jet plane travel, the miracle of television, the many things that we have today, and still so many troubles and so much sorrow and sickness all over the world.
Mr. Armstrong has carried a message of warning and of hope to leaders in every corner of the world. His relentless efforts to explain the true meaning behind world conditions have earned him the title Unofficial Ambassador for World Peace. In the remote Himalayan kingdom of Nepal, 2 great Eastern religions coexist. It is the only Hindu kingdom in the world, as well as the birthplace of Buddhism. In the Kathmandu Valley, hundreds of gods are an age-old testimony to the dominant role religion plays in the people's way of life.
It has given me a great honor and privilege to introduce such a great man who is visiting our country. A person like Mr. Herbert W. Armstrong. This gentleman, from all his life, has one ambition and one thought, and that is peace in the world. There should be peace, no war.
They've called me an unofficial ambassador for world peace, and so I am. But let me say that there has to be a reason why we don't have peace. And you cannot have peace until there is something that will cause that peace. And there has to be a reason why something has caused us to have just the opposite of peace in this world today. And I'm afraid so many don't understand that. Now, in the world today, there are many different ideologies and philosophies and religions, and everybody seems to think that their own, of course, is the right one and the only one that is true and correct. And I did not come to bring any religion or philosophy or ideology, but just to state a few facts that are facts. We do not have peace and will not have peace until human nature has been changed.
Herbert W. Armstrong is able to survey the 20th century from a unique perspective. In his long life, he has seen the coming of the inventions that have made possible the modern age: the airplane, radio and television, the computer, space travel. Inventions that have changed our world, but not our thinking. In his lifetime, there have been two major attempts by the nations to bring about world peace. After World War I, the victors formed the League of Nations. Hopes were high that the world's governments could now act collectively to prevent war. But the League failed. It was unable to restrain the aggression by the fascist dictators in the 1930s. In June 1945, Mr. Armstrong, as an accredited press representative, was present at the signing of the United Nations Charter at Herbst Theater in San Francisco. The United Nations was a sincere effort to preserve the peace by a world tired of war. But the nations have continued to fight, oblivious to the only way to halt the endless cycles of death and destruction.
Now, I'm not going out to crusade and just stop all wars. I can't do that. I have enough sense to know that I can never do that. And there is no man on earth who can. It is only the great Creator who can, and it's because we do not rely on the Creator for the knowledge of how to live and how to do, and because we just look to ourselves, that we find we're helpless before our problems. The world does not know how to live because it does not rely on the great Creator that is above all the gods and above all that is worshipped, above all of the ideas of human beings. But most human beings know nothing of that God. I can just tell you that
Mr. Armstrong is an ambassador from a kingdom that is not of this world, with a message about government, law, war and peace, and the plan of God. That plan and the course of events that have led to our dangerous modern world were outlined long ago in the much misunderstood prophecies of the Bible.